Shalom, dear friends, and welcome to our Bible study on the book of Genesis. The study for today is going to be on Genesis chapter 38. And I should mention at the outset that I recorded this same Bible study session several days ago, but made so many mistakes in it, just wasn't satisfied with it. So this is going to be the second recording of Genesis 38. And once this study session is published on YouTube, I'll plan to delete the other one. So there will only be one study of Genesis 38, hopefully without a bunch of errors that I made. This is an interesting chapter of the Bible because it interrupts a focus of the divine writings on the life and experiences and ministry of Yosef, one of Jacob's 12 sons. That focus began in the last Bible study that we did on chapter 37, which was the one where we learned about Joseph's not so happy relationship with his brothers and how they decided to sell him to slavery in Egypt. And at the end of chapter 37, there was Joseph in Egypt, just getting started with a new life there, not a very happy one. And then in chapter 38, we're going to interrupt that focus that runs from chapter 17 to chapter 50, the last chapter of Genesis. But this chapter interrupts that right after the kind of introductory material on Joseph. So the focus today is going to be on another of the sons of Jacob, and his name is Judah. So like with the other Bible studies that we've done in this series, if you would prefer not to go through my PowerPoint background material with me, which I'm about to do, I would encourage you at this point to fast forward through the PowerPoint stuff until you get to the Bible software material for Genesis 38 and take it up from there. For those of you who are interested in a little bit of background on Genesis chapter 38, then stick with me as we go through our background material on PowerPoint. I have been recommending this book. It's a book that I've written, kind of a systematic theology on the Nazarene Essene sect of Judaism. It's available to you through Amazon, and I'm recommending this book because a lot of the material in Nazarene Essene theology is interpretations of Genesis. It takes up a large portion of that book. We've also been looking at dispensational charts. This particular one is of the age of promise. It involves the patriarchs of Ram, whose name was changed to Abraham, Yitzhak, his son, and then Yaakov, the son of Yitzhak, whose name was changed to Israel. Jacob had 12 sons. They are listed here. Some of them are particularly significant, especially the one we're looking at today, because the red ribbon of salvation or redemption goes right through the person of Judah and the tribe that would emanate from him. He is the fourth son in the birth order. We have already talked about the ones who preceded him. Reuben is the firstborn and would have been expected to receive the double portion and the oldest son's benefits when his father passed away. But he kind of shamed himself by having a sexual relation with one of one of the maidservants that went along with Jacob's wives. So they're kind of second level wives. I think it was Bilhah that he slept with. But anyway, this was an insult to his father. And so he was kind of disinherited as the firstborn son. Shimon came next, and then Levi. Levi is the tribe that would produce the priests and the Levites, who would be the religious workers in the in the nation of Israel that would develop after a few more generations. Shimon and Levi kind of disinherited themselves when they really massacred the town of Shechem after Hamor, the son of Shechem, had, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. After Shechem, the son of Hamor, who was the founder of the city and named it after his son, after Shechem had fallen in love with, sort of raped Dinah, the only daughter that's mentioned in Scripture that was born to Yaakov and Leah. And so, because of their violence and because of the reaction of the community around which this took place, these two kind of get disinherited. Then the Judah will be the tribe of nobility. That's the tribe the kings will issue forth from. And then Joseph down the line here was actually the second youngest. He was the firstborn son of Rachel, who was Yaakov's favorite wife. And his tribe doesn't serve that much of an interesting purpose, as far as prophets, priests, or kings or anything like that. But Joseph does receive a double portion of land in the promised land. His two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, both of those two sons inherit large portions of the promised land. So in a way, you could say that as far as the land inheritance goes, the tribe of Joseph got a double portion. The real significance of the story of Joseph is that in so many ways, he is a type of the Messiah. He's a type of Yeshua. For example, kind of rejected by his own brothers, disowned by them, sold into slavery, as Yeshua was sold by Judas Iscariot, Yehuda Ishkariot, sold unto death. Joseph for 20 shekels and Yeshua for 30. So yeah, that's kind of the summary of the kind of the family tree of Israel. We've been looking at this map kind of from chapter 12 on, because the red arrow that outlines the travels of the specifically Abraham, but mainly the patriarchs, kind of outlines the extent of the Holy Land. The Bible texts that are included here indicate that the boundaries of the Promised Land are from the river of Egypt, which would be the Nile, to the great river Euphrates on the north. So a large parcel of land that's never been completely occupied and owned, possessed by the chosen people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, the Jewish people. We've also looked at the family tree of Abraham. God had said, you shall be the father of many nations. And already in Genesis, we see some of those nations emerging. Although Lot was the nephew of Abraham, his daughters bore him sons, and kind of a yucky story of relationships there. And Moab was the name of one of those sons, and he became the ancestor of the Moabites. And Ammon was the other one, and he became the ancestor of the Ammonites. Then we have Abraham bearing two significant sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac would go on to be the father of Yaakov and the ancestor of the Israelites. Of course, Isaac married Rivkah, and Laban was the brother of Rivkah, whom Yaakov married two of his daughters and gave birth to the 12 tribes, the 12 sons, which became 12 tribes, and here are the Israelites. Now, the Israelites are not marked on this map because all of the territory that God promised to Israel in our chapter studies, that is being occupied by the Canaanites. We do have Ammon and Moab marked on the map here. And we also have the nation that sprang from Esav, Yaakov's brother. That's the Edomites. And here they are down in the south. Next thing is kind of the family tree, the breakdown of who bore which sons. Leah bore most of them, six of them. Here are the first four that we have talked about. And Leah also had a maidservant named Zilpah, and these are her children, Gad and Asher. Rachel was Joseph's favorite. He was the first one that she was the first one that he fell in love with. And she was barren for many years, but eventually gave birth to Joseph before the family left Haran and traveled south to the land of Canaan. And also Benjamin, who was born in the land of Canaan. Rachel also had a maidservant named Bilhah, and she was the mother of Dan and Naphtali. Then we have the journeys of Joseph. The most interesting thing on this map is the green arrow that shows the path that Yosef took when his brothers sold him into slavery. And here the arrow stops down in the land of Goshen, which may or may not be the place that he ended up when he was sold into slavery there. And the other arrows indicate other interesting journeys that we will follow in future chapters. But that's kind of all we'll talk about there for now. We do want to talk a little bit about Judah's chronology, since he's the focus of this chapter. Number one, Judah was the fourth son of Jacob and Leah, born perhaps in the fourth year of the 20-year sojourn in Haran. So, although it doesn't tell exactly what his ages are or what year he was born, he was perhaps 16 years old at the time of the departure from Haran. Now, because Jacob was 97 years old when he left Haran, and we know that he was 130 when he entered into Egypt, according to Genesis 47:9. That tells us that Judah had only 33 years in Canaan before leaving Egypt at the age of 50. And he's the one that we're interested in. And we realize that most of his family had been born before he left the Haran. So that leaves him with 33 years in Canaan before leaving for Egypt at the age of 50. So the first verses of chapter 38 are going to happen at the beginning of this 33-year period, and the last verses towards the end of it. So this chapter is going to cover about 33 years. So during those 33 years, he married and had three sons. Their names were Onan, and Shelah. Was old enough to marry Tamar and then die. Onan, the second son, then married Tamar, so he was marriageable age also, and also died. But the Bible tells us that Shelah, the youngest son, was too young to marry. And so we'll talk about that when we come to it. So the events of the first verses of Genesis 38 happened shortly after the return from Haran to Canaan. The latter verses happened just prior to the departure for Egypt. Now, why the scriptures interrupt the saga of Joseph to tell this story, I don't really know, but I imagine it has something to do with this chronology. So then we have a little Bible passage here on a subject called levirate marriage. That term is derived from the Latin term levir. So it's not a biblical term, but it is applied to the biblical concept. And it has to do with a brother-in-law marrying his deceased brother's wife and producing children for the deceased brother. So here's the text. We'll just read through this, and I think it will kind of explain a lot of the material that we'll be studying today. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. Now, that sounds a lot more like a command than it does a suggestion, and I think we need to take it in that vein. And it shall be that the firstborn son, which she bears by the brother-in-law, will succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name, the dead brother's name, may not be blotted out in Israel. So the brother-in-law has a responsibility to his deceased brother to raise up seed for his brother's family, so that branch of the family tree doesn't die out in Israel. And that was very important to God because the tribes were very important. But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, in other words, he's going to disobey this commandment, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate of the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother, to the deceased brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty, that would be the leveret duty of the husband's brother. Then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him. But if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. Notice that the penalty for breaking God's laws in regard to the responsibility of the brother-in-law is not the death penalty, but it's kind of a public humiliation. And that will be important as we look at some of the events that transpire here and try to figure out basically what the sin is. Then verse 10, his name shall be called in Israel, the house of one who has had his sandal removed. In other words, a man who should be ashamed of himself for not helping out his brother's family. Another thing we need to keep in mind is that one of the one of the offspring in the chapter that we will study today, his name is Perez, P-E-R-E-Z in English, is going to be considered an illegitimate child. But he is going to be born into the line of the chosen people, the branch of the family tree of the people of Israel that will produce the kings. In other words, the line of Judah. And one of the things that we need to understand about the timing of when kings from Judah emerged on the scene is this text from Deuteronomy 23:2, which says, one of illegitimate birth, that will be Peretz, and you'll see why. One of illegitimate birth shall not enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Now, just exactly what's meant by the assembly of the Lord may mean like the worship services of the Lord, or it may be just the living in the community of God's people. An illegitimate son may have been kind of banished to kind of make it on his own outside the community. It would, whatever that means, it would certainly apply to the kings of Israel. So the most significant king of the tribe of Judah is King David, the first king of that tribe. But we realized that he would have to be the 10th generation descendant to Peretz, or he would not be allowed, according to the law of Moses, to serve as the king. Interesting thing, if we look at the genealogy of Yeshua in Matthew chapter 1, if we read the first 6 verses, that's talking about the people that we're studying now and the next 10 generations. So here is the genealogy, and then we'll point out Peretz and we'll kind of count the descendants. The book of the genealogy of Yeshua the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Yitzhak. Yitzhak begot Yaakov. Yaakov begot Yehuda and all of his brothers. And these are all legitimate sons in the chosen family. But Judah begot Peretz by Tamar, who was not Jewish, who was not his wife. And so Peretz and his brother Zerah were illegitimate. So that's the first illegitimate generation. Peretz is the one whose branch off of Judah is going to become the kings. So we count him as number one. Then Peretz begot Hezron, two. Hezron begot Ram, three. Ram begot Aminadab, four. Aminadab begot Nachshon, five. Nachshon begot Salmon, that's six. Salmon begot Boaz, that's seven, famous from the story of Ruth. And he married Rachav. Boaz begot Oved, that would be eight by Ruth. Oved begot Yesai, that's David's father, and so Yesai begot David the king. 10th generation, David could enter into the assembly and would be qualified to be the king of Judah. So let's go ahead and dive into our Bible text for today. I'm accidentally pausing my shares here. So Genesis 38, verse 1, reading here from the New King James Version. Of course, we've got the Hebrew Old Testament, the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew, and then we've got the study notes from the Dake Study Bible, which is my all-time fave. So Genesis 38:1, it came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hirah. And I would say this is all taking place shortly after the family returned from Haran, up in modern-day Syria, came to Canaan and continued the what shall we call it? The Hebrew lifestyle there in the promised land, which none of it was owned by them yet. So Adullam is a place name. The resident of that place name is Hirah. That turns out to be a friend of Yehuda. And Yehuda saw there in Adullam a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. So Shua is the father of the girl that Yehuda saw. And I'd like to say he fell in love with her. I think he probably did. So he married her and he went in to her. Ba'elea is the Hebrew way of, it's kind of a euphemism for sexual intercourse. Another such euphemism is the Hebrew word yada, which means to know in a carnal manner. But there's nothing wrong with this marriage. It's a completely legitimate marriage. The only drawback is that Judah is not marrying somebody from within his own family. He's not marrying a Hebrew girl. He's marrying a Canaanite girl. But unless he wanted to travel back to Haran in Syria and try to find another daughter among the extended family, that's who he's kind of stuck with, I guess. She was probably a great gal. Verse 3 then, so she conceived and bore a son and called his name. It's actually pronounced Er, like with a long A sound. So his name was called Er. She conceived again and bore a son and called his name Onan. Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son and called his name Shelah. That's the birth order. He was at Cheziv when she bore him. So he met her at Adullam. Apparently they moved to Cheziv and started raising their three sons there. Then in verse 6, Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Now, Tamar appears to be a Canaanite girl also. And keep in mind that this is the kind of an arranged marriage that Judah arranged for his firstborn son, Er. So it's going to be Er and Tamar. Verse 7, but Er, Yehuda's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. And so the Bible doesn't tell us what his wickedness was, but it was significant enough that God executed judgment in kind of a personal way, whether he died of a disease or in an accident, or whether, the Lord rained fire and brimstone on him. We don't know, but God judged him and killed him. The Bible's very straightforward about that. So Tamar is left as a widow, which brings us to the idea of the Levirate marriage. So the second son, Onan, is now going to come into play. So Yehuda said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir to your brothers. So these instructions from Judah, although the law of Moses has not been given, this practice of levirate marriage was evidently part of the culture in Canaan and among the Hebrews. So Yehuda expected Onan to marry his dead brother's wife. Now, Onan is going to be judged also, but not for breaking the law of Moses, because the law of Moses hasn't been given yet. Now, morals and ethics have been passed on by word of mouth through all these generations, up to the point of Moses, where the law is written down on stone and scrolls and things like that. So the crime of Onan is not going to be violating the law of Moses, but violating God's code of ethics and his conscience. So in other words, deep down in his heart, Onan knows that what he's about to do is wrong, but he does it anyway, probably for his own benefit and advantage. But like I say, God is going to judge him too. So there's the command by Onan's father to perform the duties of a levirate marriage. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, because according to levirate marriage, the firstborn son of the brother-in-law and the wife of the deceased husband is like credited to the line of the deceased brother, not to Onan. So he knew that the first child born would not be his. And it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife, and here again we have Ba'alea, he went into her, in other words, had sex with her, that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. So this is kind of graphic. It's talking about the actual procedure of sexual intercourse. So penetration was made, but before he was able to impregnate her, he withdrew, and the semen, the seed, the zerah, fell on the ground, and it experienced shachat. Shachat in Hebrew means destruction or corruption. In other words, that precious bodily fluid could not perform the God-given function that God gave for it. So he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. Now, this last phrase tells what his motive was. He did not want to provide an heir for his brother. He was apparently willing to take responsibility for her as a wife. Maybe he had something against his brother, we don't know. But the reason he interfered with her conceiving a child for the dead brother's family is because he didn't want to. He intentionally did this. This was no accident. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore the Lord killed him also. Now, a couple of things here. There are several opinions about why the Lord killed him and what it was that he did that displeased the Lord. And I've got a few suggestions. And these come from legitimate biblical scholars, and lots of people believe the various answers. So the first one, and maybe the most popular understanding of this passage, is that God condemns masturbation. And I don't think that's what's going on here, because, I mean, as we look at the gory details of this, What took place here is not really masturbation. It would be what? A premature withdrawal and a spilling of the seed. So the spilling of the seed, which takes place in masturbation or in a behavior like we just read about, is not punishable by death. When there is a spilling of seed, when there is an emission of precious bodily fluids, um, the only punishment that God ordains in the law of Moses, again, which comes later, is that the person who experiences the emission and anybody who the emission gets on is unclean until the sun sets. So it's a very short period of time where the person is like ceremonially unclean. They can't go to the temple. They can't offer any sacrifices, or um, and so forth. So I don't think this is talking about masturbation. Another thing that is said that it could be referring to is that it could be referring to birth control. So, I mean, this would be kind of a primitive method of birth control that Onan would have sexual relations with her as many times as she was willing to, as willing as many times as she was willing to do that. But if he withdrew before she could conceive, then he was preventing the conception from happening. And that, like I say, that would be a primitive form of birth control. But that too, there's no biblical statement that says birth control is evil in God's eyes or punishable by death. The attachment of birth control to biblical morals is based solely on this story. Nothing else in the scriptures indicates that birth control is immoral. So, what is the crime? I think the crime is that Onan violated his own conscience. He took Tamar to be his wife, but he did not provide a necessary aspect of their marriage according to God's plan and according to cultural and moral convention at this time. So, because he refused to raise up seed for his brother, I believe is the reason the Lord killed him. Not masturbation, not birth control, but refusing to do follow his conscience and do his moral responsibility to his wife and to his brother. So that's all we'll say about that. Verse 11, then Yehuda said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. Because according to this cultural moray, and later according to the law of Moses, Shelah would have the same responsibility that Onan had according to the Levirate code. But Shelah is legitimately probably too young to be married. But that's not all that's going into this statement by Yehuda, because this verse goes on to say, for he said, that's Yehuda said, probably in his heart. He probably did not say this out loud, lest he also die like his brothers. Now, you can't blame him for thinking this, because he has two sons that he has given to this girl to be their husbands, and both of them have died. He doesn't want to lose his third son. Whether he thinks it's just bad karma, I'm sure he didn't think it was bad karma. Bad luck, I'm sure he didn't think it was bad luck. A bad idea? Maybe a bad idea. But we'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and we'll say that he held back his son Shelah because Shelah was not old enough. And again, this probably, everything we've read so far probably took place early on in the 33 years between the return from Haran and the departure for Egypt. So Tamar follows this advice, and she went and dwelt in her father's house. Now, in the process of time, with that phrase, we're going to leap ahead into the future. How far into the future, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure how long these events took. Not sure how long Er was married to Tamar, not sure how long Onan was married, probably a short time. But these events that follow are going to take place later. Now, in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, who was Judah's wife. Remember, I don't think her name is given, but this is the daughter of Shua that Judah had married and gave birth to those, and she gave birth to those three sons. Well, she died also. So things are tough for Yehuda. Yehuda was comforted. Nacham is the Hebrew word, which means comforted, or it can also mean like to change your mind or regret something. I think comforted is the best translation here. And he went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah. Judah is kind of the patriarch of his branch of the family. So probably his remaining son and servants in his household are in a different location, shearing the sheep as they would routinely do. And so perhaps to get his mind off of his grief of his two sons and his wife, he and his friend Hirah, the Adulamite, um, went up to join the sheep shearers and busied themselves with the family business. Verse 13, and it was told Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law, that's Yehuda, is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. Why she was told this? I mean, it makes sense. She might be interested. She might want to, say hello to her father-in-law and see how he's doing, see how Shelah is getting along in age and so forth. So she took off her widow's garments. Now, I don't know if widows in those days dressed in black. Nowadays, I think it's culturally typical for widows to dress in black for a while. But she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself in, some kind of what would it be? Some kind of a robe or a garment, and sat in a place which was on the way to Timnah. So she covers herself with a veil, dresses in non-mourning clothes on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown and she was not given to him as a wife. So remember, Yehuda had told her, go live with your father for a while until Shelah is old enough to be your husband, and then I'll give him to you. So that was the expectation she had. She realized that Shelah was old enough to be married to her, but Yehuda wasn't doing anything about it. So she wanted to see what she could do about that. So verse 15, when Yehuda saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. So apparently the typical way that harlots would present themselves as harlots, as available for the sex business, was to veil their faces. Cultures change. Later on, not having a veil is going to, like in the New Testament era, not for a woman not to wear a veil would signify that she was a kind of a morally loose woman. So she dresses like a harlot, and then she turned to her. He turned to her, by the way, and said, "Please let me come into you." And here again, we have this expression of bo to the isha, going into the woman means having sexual relations. He thought she was a harlot. So, he wanted to do this act with a prostitute, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law, because her face was veiled. So she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? So this would not be a surprising question, since Yehuda thought Tamar was a prostitute. She was just asking how much she was going to get for her services. He said, I will send you a young goat from the flock. So she said, will you give me a pledge till you send it? Which kind of speaks for itself. Like, give me a down payment, give me some collateral so that, I can be sure I'm going to end up with my goat for providing you the services that you want. Then he said, what pledge shall I give you? So she said, your signet and cord and your staff. Now, the word for staff here is mate. It's mem tet che. That it's the word for like like a walking stick, but it's also the word for like a scepter that would represent headship in a family. In our information window down at the bottom of the page here, we see that it can also mean a tribe. A tribe is a mate. So this is probably not just an ordinary walking staff, but a scepter that would identify Judah as the head of the family. Also, a signet is what she wanted. Now, we're familiar with signet rings, which are rings that have like an engraving on the face, that if you take that ring and press it into soft wax, it will leave the impression of like the family seal. But if that's what was being talked about here, it would probably have what is ring, tabach or something like that. It would probably say that it was a signet ring. If it doesn't say ring, it's probably like a pendant. Now, I don't know how well you can see this, but I wear a pendant that has the messianic seal embossed on it. If I pressed this into soft wax, it would leave that seal. Now, this is just, a symbol of Messianic Judaism. If you can't make it out very well, it has the menorah at the top, the Star of David in the middle, and then what most people think is a fish at the bottom. It's actually a Coptic alphabet of the Hebrew letter Aleph, um, like in Aleph and Tav, the beginning and the end. So this is probably the kind of signet that Yehuda gave her, and it's the family seal, so it would be quite valuable. And then a cord, which is patil, and I'm not sure, what the cord meant, unless it was the cord by which the pendant hung. So 3 objects are listed here. 2 of them may have been tied together, the signet and the cord around his neck. So whether 2 or 3, he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil, in other words, her prostitute's outfit, and put on the garments of her widowhood. So she put her black dress back on, her grieving clothes back on. And Yehuda sent the young goat by the hand of a friend of the Adulamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but the friend did not find her. So you get the idea. Tamar and Yehuda have separated and gone their own ways. Yehuda was busy with the sheep shearing, so he went to his flock, found a goat that would be suitable for her, gave it to his friend, the Adulamite. The Adulamite went in search of Tamar, as we will see in the verses that lie ahead, but he didn't find them. And the idea was that once the girl got the goat, she was going to give back the signet cord and staff, but he did not find her. Verse 21, he didn't give up. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, where's the harlot who was openly by the roadside? He's talking about Tamar, but the men of the city said there was no harlot in this place. So they knew Tamar, but they knew she wasn't a harlot, but they didn't know she had dressed like one to make this happen. All right. Verse 22, so he returned, the friend returned to Yehuda and said, I cannot find her. Also, the men of the place said there was no harlot in the place where this supposedly happened. Then Yehuda said, let her take them for herself. Let her take what? What's the them? It would be the signet, the cord, and the staff. He said, I've sent a young goat for her, and you have not found her. So maybe he's saying, well, I'll just keep the goat then, and she can have my stuff, and I'll get another signet made up or something like that. Verse 24, and it came to pass about 3 months later, in other words, 3 months after the illicit relationship between Yehuda and Tamar. So, what usually happens in the third month of pregnancy? Well, women begin to show. And all the people of the town knew that Tamar was a widow and did not have a man in her life, or shouldn't have had a man in her life. And so she's showing to be pregnant. And so it came to us, the Judah was told, maybe by the people from the city, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she's found with child by harlotry. So the townspeople are not saying, uh, they are saying she's played the harlot, but they don't think she's played the harlot with Judah. Furthermore, she's with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Now remember, Judah knows that he had intercourse with a harlot, but he doesn't know that it was Tamar. So as far as he's concerned, Tamar has played the harlot with some other guy. He probably can't imagine that he's the one who did this. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine whose they are, the signet and the cord and the staff. So Yehuda now is like a child who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. So Yehuda acknowledged them and said, she's been more righteous than I, because I did not give her Shelah, my son, and he never knew her again. Here again, we have the word knew. Let's see, where is it? Yosef Yod Da'at. It's Da'at. It's Yada. The Hebrew word means to know. It means know carnally. So he did not have any further carnal relations with her. But she's got his children. So yeah, he acknowledges his sinfulness. She's been more righteous than I, because I did not give her my son. He's not talking about his sexual relations with her, although he's guilty of that too. Although I don't know if he could say she's more righteous than me because she played a more righteous prostitute. So verse 27, now it came to pass at the time for giving birth that behold, twins were in her womb. So when she and Judah had their relationship, she conceived twins. So 2 children. And so it was that when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand. So what this means is, as the midwife is tending to Tamar as she's giving birth, one of the children, and I'll identify that child, it's Zerah, put his hand outside the womb so that the midwife could see it. Okay? Again, pretty graphic. And the midwife took a scarlet thread or a cord or a string or something and bound it on his hand, on the hand that was stuck out, saying, this one came out first. Now, this was an important declaration to make, because the first child that comes from the womb, even though they're twins, is considered the firstborn and inherits the double portion and the headship in the family. So Zerah is the one who put his hand out first and is identified with the red thread on it. Then it happened as Zerah, drew back his hand with the scarlet string on it, that his brother came out. The brother is Peretz, came out unexpectedly. So not only did Peret's hand come out, but his whole body came out. So he was fully born at this time. And she said, now whether the she is the midwife or whether it is Tamar who's giving birth or some other she says about this child who was suddenly, unexpectedly born, how did you break through? In other words, it was expected that Zerah puts his hand out, so it would be thought that he was the one lined up to be born first in the birth canal. He puts his hand out, he draws it back, but the other child comes out, the one without the string on his hand. So Peretz somehow displaced Zerah from the birth canal and was born first. So the midwife or Tamar says, how did you break through? Now the word breakthrough here is the word paratz. Paratz. It is a verb that means to break through. This breach, paretz, same root word, same meaning, to break through. This breach be upon you. Therefore, his name is called Peretz. So he's named after the idea that he breached past his brother and was born first. Afterward, his brother came out who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Zerah means, actually, Zerach. This is not the word for seed. I thought it was seed. Zerach. It's only given as a name here, so I'm not sure what Zerach with a chet on the end of it means. I don't know if Dake tells us that, perhaps. No. Oh, okay, Zerach. Oh, of course I knew that. Of course I knew that. It means the rising of the sun or the dawn. Okay, so Peretz is given his name. It means to breach because he kind of bullied his way through to be born first. And Zerach means, yes, the dawn of or the sunrise. And that's the end of chapter 38. When we take it up in the next video, we'll be chapter 39, and we'll go right back to Yosef. So this kind of bizarre, kind of shameful story takes place. It interrupts the story of Joseph, but it does tell us something about Judah, and it also tells us something about the line that would eventually produce the Messiah. So in our preliminary material, we looked at the genealogy of Yeshua, and we saw that all these characters are in it, including Judah and Peretz, and then, the later kings of Israel, David and his father Yesai. But David was the 10th generation from Peretz, and so because 10 generations had passed, David was not considered an illegitimate child, but the 9 who preceded him would be, and therefore would not be qualified to be the king. So let me give you a blessing from the New Testament, since we did mention Yeshua and the New Testament. Let me give you the blessing from there. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Hope you'll join us next time for chapter 39.